Okay guys, let's get cracking. So I have 4 photos here, all from the same place in the Peak District called Milldale, and I'm just going to focus on editing this first particular photo here, and then maybe apply the same color treatment and edit to the other photos as well. Now, what I'm looking for in terms of when I do these edits, really, particularly of the ones of the houses around the kind of English countryside, is something warmer. So although I like the style of very kind of dark, shadowy, quite cold photos of places like the Alps, I think when it comes to dealing with places in England, I like something to be a little bit warmer, probably because most of the time it's actually quite cold. Now, when I'm working through these edits, my workflow, like your workflow, might be slightly different. A different day, I might deal with the light and the shadows, etc. Then I might deal with the color treatment afterwards, then the tone curve, or the other way around. It just really depends on sort of what I'm thinking at the time. Because I'm recreating the edit today, what I'll do is I'll work through this from kind of top to bottom in a fairly linear fashion. So we're starting from the top. So the first thing I do is this photo is straight from the camera. It has had no cropping or editing or anything like that. I tried to get the correct composition in camera as much as I can, just to sort of retain as much information as I can as well. But you'll notice that it's reasonably well balanced in terms of the white balance, and it in itself is quite cold. So the first thing I'm going to do is just sort of slide up the temperature slider. I'm just going to keep going until I get a really rich, warm, sort of orangey texture on the gate and on the bricks as well. That will cancel out a little bit of the green, so I'm just going to bring a tiny bit of the green tint back into the shot. Okay, so that's the first part of the colour treatment that I'll do. The exposure itself, I don't have a particular issue with this. What I'm probably going to do here though is I'm going to make the overall light treatment brighter, because I know that when I deal with my colours I'm going to be doing a lot of desaturation and reducing a lot of the luminosity of the colours. So I'm just going to work through these. So the exposure I'm going to leave. The contrast, and I'll go through phases of contrast. At the moment I feel with this particular image here and a lot of the photos I'm taking, there is quite a lot of detail in here, and sometimes if you make it contrasty, it can look a bit, a little bit too punchy. So I'm just going to bring that down by 20. The highlights for the moment I'm going to leave. I want to make some local adjustments in the top right corner here with the highlights. Now what I'm going to do is, again, when you create moody edits, you tend to kill the shadows and kill the blacks, but I'm actually going to do the opposite of that and bring in a bit of extra light into the shadows and go the other way and reduce the whites of the image and then bring the blacks right out. And what you can see is the image is now becoming very light, very pale, but that's fine. So we're not going to stay in that direction. We're going to bring that back down and work with the tone curves and the colours to sort of bring this back to life. In the presence one, again, I really not a big fan of over clarified or too much clarity on images, but I will bring in, because I've reduced the contrast, I'm going to bring a little bit of texture in, maybe sort of 10 or 15, and then just counter that by reducing the clarity. So the clarity and the texture work, I guess, in the same way as the vibrance and saturation, as much as we bring vibrance in to the sort of mid-range of the colours, and then the saturation kills the sort of heavier side of the colours as well. So I always think that the best way to add colour is to give it vibrance but take away a little bit of saturation. I'm just going to pinch up the dehaze as well, just to bring a little bit of contrast back, but in a slightly different way. So now, again, you have a choice here. You can maybe jump straight to the colours. I'm just going to deal with the tone curve. Obviously, a big part of what goes into image editing is done in the tone curve, and I'm only going to deal with the RGB channels for this particular edit. Okay, so fairly simple. What we're going to do is just bring the blacks about halfway up that first grid square. Pinch that in just a tiny bit. What this does is that the blacks that are left in the image, and there isn't too much on here, will create that kind of faded vintage look that you get in the more sort of cinematic photos that you've seen sort of knocking around. And then just to sort of really bring this to life, and this is where the darkness and the contrast will come back into the picture, is just to drop this one here to more or less something around there. Okay, so we don't want it too contrasty, okay, but something around about that. Now again, we've kind of gone from one extreme to the other here, but you'll have to bear with in terms of the end result. So next I'm going to jump into the hue, saturation and luminance. So the hue essentially deals with the colour itself of the pixel. So what we're going to do is change anything that's yellow and just sort of bring that back towards the orange, which should give us a slightly warmer feel to the brickwork and the gates and that kind of thing. And then I'm going to go the opposite way with the greens. Now the greens, this is again quite a common technique for most people dealing with the greens, is to push the greens right out, and you get this sort of, you know, sickly luminous green sort of effect. But what we're going to do is we're going to kill that with saturation and luminance shortly. I'm just going to pop a bit of magenta in there as well, just to sort of counter some of that green. Now with the saturation, and this is where the whole sort of range of this photo is going to change dramatically. So I'm just going to kill a lot of the saturation of some of these colours in this picture. So in particular, the yellow and the green will give us probably the biggest effect. So I'm just going to bring that down to around about minus 30, 35, something like that. And then quite a dramatic sweep on the greens as well. Maybe something around 70. So as you can see now, the sort of chunky black contrast that was in there is again just starting to disappear again. I'm just going to kill a few more bits out of the blues and the aquas. Okay, just to sort of anything that is sort of lurking around there, kind of giving it a bit of a warm feel. We're just going to get rid of that, and just sort of punch in a bit of magenta again. There's probably only a smidgen in there. Likewise, the luminance, a little bit less action in here. So I'm going to kill a little bit of the reds. And again, make the yellows darker. So I'm looking at around about sort of 20, and what that does is that the yellows and the oranges that are left, you're actually giving them a little bit of extra sort of punch by making them slightly darker. So that might seem counterintuitive if you're not sure how the luminance works, but what I'm actually doing is taking something that might be quite a bright yellow or bright orange and reducing that down to something a little bit less. So here you can see now we've gone from a very sort of high light, low contrast, use a tone curve to create something very, very punchy and very, very dark, and then struck the balance there with the hue, saturation and luminance. So it really does make a huge difference to your editing. Now with the split toning, again, what you tend to find in some of the more moody shots is that they like to introduce a lot of cold tones into the highlights. So there's a multitude of ways of working with a split toning. What I tend to do is click on the sort of colour picker, and then if I just sort of click and hold on that, what I'm looking for is something around 40 degrees. Again, bringing it warm. Obviously not too far up the slider, it's looking a bit hideous. But we're going to bring that down to around about 20%, something like that. And again, what it does is just gives that sort of old world vintage feel to that. And then I'm going to counter that just slightly with the shadows. Again, I don't do too much work in the shadows anymore. But again, a good sort of colour normally to bring into your pictures to give a bit of balance is around about the 200 degrees mark on the blues. But what I want to do, if I do that too much, I'm going to make my picture quite green there, as you can see. So we're just going to pinch that in around about 6%, something like that. I think that's quite good. You can adjust the balance there, whether you want sort of more shadow colour or more highlight colour, but I'm just going to leave that in the middle as it is. Now with the sharpening, again, similar to the clarity really, is that I see a lot of pictures where there is just too much sharpening going on, and what you end up with is this sort of hideous sort of fringing and just over sharpening of images. So what I'm going to bring this down to around about sort of 10. Again, the ones that you see it worst on are leaves in the trees and that kind of thing, where there's already quite a lot of detail on there. It only needs a tiny amount of sharpening. What I want to do though is I do want to bring detail out a little bit in this brickwork here. So if I kill it completely, you can see it becomes a little bit too washed out. So I think more or less 10 is absolutely fine for this one. Transformations, I don't need to do any of this. My horizons are already perfectly straight. Everything is exactly in proportion. There's no particular need for me to straighten any of this off. There's no distortion from the lens or anything like that, so that's fine. I'm not going to add any vignette into this particular image because I'm already happy with the level of sort of darkness, if you like. But what I might do is just bring in a small amount of grain into the photo. So grain, again, just because we're going for something a little bit warmer, a bit more oldie worldy, if you like. What I want to do is maybe add a touch of grain on there to give it that sort of vintage feel. Again, what you can do here is, if you want to sort of see the effect of things like size and roughness, is ramp up the grain to 100. And then just sort of look at the size and sort of what it does, and sort of how bad a job it will do as well. So if we go too far here, it's the dots are too small. Actually, you'll find is that the default setting of sort of 20-25 is actually pretty much spot on. What I do like to do though is bring the roughness out just a tiny little bit there, and then bring this back down to something that's not completely clear like that, but again maybe sort of 10 or 15, where there's just a tiny bit of grain on there that you can see just around the letters, but everything is still pretty clear. And then the calibration. Now again, if you're doing a sort of orange and blue effect, sort of the teal styling, then actually these are quite quick wins to do that. But again, I'm already sort of finished with this composition. So if we just sort of have a look back at what it was, we can see we have the very, very sort of cold standard look and feel, and then we have the applied vintage version. Now in terms of Instagram, what I would do at this point is, all of my treatments now are finished and I'm absolutely happy with how that looks. What I'll do actually here is just take a virtual copy, and for me personally what I would do is I would use this particular photo here in my Instagram story, but the actual post itself will be a duplication of that photo, and then I will deal with the cropping here. I will go to the aspect ratio, and for Instagram the most amount of real estate you can get is selecting 4:5, so let's do that. And again, what I'm going to do is sort of drag this down, and actually that will kill a lot of that sort of nasty light in the top right corner, and just bring it down just so enough that we have a little bit of a pathway in there, but I don't want to get too close to that chimney stack at the top, so just a little bit of breathing space, more or less about there. Okay, and then it's at this point that I will just apply a couple of local adjustments. So what I want to do is just reduce down that highlight in the corner there. I want to darken this part in the bottom left, and then the bottom right here as well, and just bring focus to the entrance, the gateway, and actually the sort of the house itself. So I'm going to start with the local brush adjustment here and just reset the effects. It's going to select just a reduction in the highlights here and just slowly bring that down. Now you can see that I haven't got auto mask selected because I'm happy for it to sort of go across the various bits and pieces that I need to. So I'm just going to paint that on. I'll use the keyboard shortcut O just to see where we're at, and maybe just sort of erase a little bit back out from there as well, and on the chimney stack. And again, just sort of bring that highlight slider down just so it kills that top bit and not create too much of a distraction there. Now with the bottom part here, what I want to do is get a graduated filter and just bring that up here. I just want to darken this bottom corner just so it takes the eye into the gate. Now I can do this quite dramatically actually. I'm not too worried about making that too dark. I think probably around about there is okay, maybe a touch darker, and work with that. And then I'm going to do the same thing again with the local adjustment brush, but maybe not so much, and just sort of darken out this tiny bit here, again just to sort of give a bit of emphasis to this area here. And the last thing I might do is, just for the sake of cleanliness, now I don't like to you know, remove articles from a picture that would be there permanently. So, you know, removing dustbins and road signs and people, not a huge fan of doing that. But when you've got sort of bits of leaves and chewing gum and that sort of thing, then just to keep things a little bit sort of tidy, I'll just remove some of the you know, some of the bits and pieces that stick out quite a lot. Again, I don't always do this, just sometimes it just looks a tiny bit untidy out here, and I'm sure the people that rent this cottage out, and if you didn't know that, you can visit Let's Go Peak District, and you can actually rent this this cottage out for, I think it's a minimum of 3 nights, but an amazing place to stay. And then just up the road there's another one as well, which is also dog friendly, so if you are a dog owner, then you can stay in a cottage like this one. So I think pretty much we are there with that. And then what we can do as well, that's what we said at the start of the video, is I can take the edit itself and the settings, and what we can do is go to develop settings and copy settings. Okay, I've got all of these selected, that's just sort of default here. Some of these haven't been in use, I haven't sort of transformed anything, etc. I haven't changed any of the profile colouring, but regardless, it doesn't matter if it applies a change that hasn't actually occurred. So I'm just going to copy that, and then we can look at maybe one of these other pictures here, and then I can just apply those settings by going on paste settings. And again, what it will do is it will transform the look of that photo again. So here we have the before, here we have the after. This particular one I might just adjust this back slightly just to get the yellow of the jacket back a little bit, 'cause it's a little bit too orange, and the skin tones as well, but you can see obviously what we're doing here. So so that's it guys in terms of the edit and the workflow for me. My edits tend to be very similar when I'm doing this kind of type of sort of composition, but I'm going to be posting more edits as normal in terms of maybe more landscape photos, more dramatic photos, some cold edits, etc. as well. So be sure to give us a like and hit the subscribe button, because that is what fuels us guys on. So that's it for today, and I'll speak to you guys soon, and don't forget to follow me at Instagram. I am liamwood_shots, so you can check out this picture and plenty more, and you can see the evolution of my editing style on there as well. So okay, take care guys.